The lessons during the month of August are based on a set of core values that the Board of Trustees, the licensed unity leaders, and staff discerned beginning last year. And we're still in a process of opening ourselves up to what these mean. And you'll be invited into that process this year as well. These are faith, spirituality or spirit, prayer, service, and inclusion. We use these core values to be the organizing principle for planning events and classes and activities. They're our touchstone. Not everything is going to correlate perfectly, but the main things, the main events and classes that we do here that represent us as a spiritual community, we use this set of values, again, as our touchstone, as our proof, our proof text for scheduling these things. Because if they're out of alignment with our values, then it belies the integrity of our spiritual community. It, in some ways, muddies our identity. It makes things a little fuzzy. But if we align ourselves with these values, we use them as a way to organize ourselves as a spiritual community, then we find a sense of cohesion and congruence in everything that we do, and that becomes palpable. Again, these are values that were discerned from leadership, from staff, from the LULs, and again, you will be invited into this process as well. Throughout the rest of the year, there will be opportunities to express these core values, these important components of what it means to be UCR, our identity as a spiritual community. And so today we begin with faith, which seems to be the appropriate place to begin. As a spiritual community, we are grounded in faith. That is the essence of who and what we are. And honestly, if we had not been grounded in faith, I don't know where we would be right now. It is what has kept us going. It has kept us nimble and flexible during this last year and a half. When I was the senior minister in Naples, Florida, I did international trips almost every year. And the last one I led, no, the last one was Italy. The second to the last one was China. There were 46 of us who went on this trip. So when we were in country in China, we filled up a bus. Well, when we arrived to Shanghai after being on that leg of the flight for 15, 16 hours, we were all a little grouchy, all a little hungry, all a little sleepy, but still this odd mixture of excitement too. Well, we were taken to a hotel, but we're told to get up very early in the morning to get on a bus. We were tired. I mean, literally, our body clocks were turned upside down. And people were grouchy and hungry by the end of the day. And so the tour guide, this wonderful Chinese man who was just this core and essence of peace and kindness and love, was having a little difficulty with some of the folks on the bus because they were saying, basically the kid question, are we there yet? And so he came to me and he said, do you think perhaps, Debra, that you could speak to them a little bit about flexibility? Because, so now I was grouchy and tired too. So I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So I get up and I go to the front of the bus. They hand me a microphone and I'm like, okay, what do I say? Because I was feeling some of the same emotion. And I looked out the window and I saw, in China there are these beautiful, just like we have beside our pond, these beautiful weeping willow trees. And I looked out the window and saw one by a body of water and it was sort of swaying. And I said, well, let's all be like weeping willows. And I started to do this odd little weeping willow hula dance, right? And because literally I wasn't sure what to say. My mind was tired. I was foggy. And so the bus stopped, and I lurched forward and fell into the laps of the people who were on the front row. Well, everybody was hushed because they wanted to make sure I was okay. And then I stood up and everybody just laughed. And it became sort of the running joke of the rest of the trip. And anytime any of us would start to feel grouchy or hungry or tired, everybody would start to do this weird little weeping willow hula dance that I did. But it seems at times that our flexibility and our ability to remain nimble and moldable and malleable in situations is often tested. And it requires a sense of faith so that we can be truly grounded, rooted, but still be nimble enough to do our little odd little willow hula dance in life. That requires faith. Faith, according to our founder, Charles Fillmore, is the power to comprehend the infinite reality of creation and to apprehend the invisible realm of creative potential and bring it into manifestation. It is that which grounds us. It apprehends that which is within us, that which is of this invisible realm of substance and possibility, and brings it into manifestation. You know, as I shared last week, we can be, in fact, we already are grounded in God. We already are. Just some of us, like me at times, don't realize it yet. And we're always using this power of faith. You have the power to experience a life of joy and abundance and peace and well-being as we remain nimble and flowing. But we can also have faith in the limited and limiting experiences of the world. And our faith, it seems, breathes some very powerful energy into these experiences. And we find before too long that these experiences are looming like mountains before us. But as we pivot our faith, again, knowing that we are grounded in God, then we can begin to say to those mountains, as Jesus challenged us to do, move, mountain, move. Charles Fillmore assigned each of the 12 main disciples of Jesus' core group of disciples. He named each of those as a representative of 12 important spiritual faculties that each and every one of us have. Jesus represents the Christ, that divine essence under whose direction we want to make sure these 12 spiritual faculties remain. And interestingly, the disciple that represents faith is Peter. Now, Peter wasn't always this perfect example of faith, as one of the stories I'll share with you in a moment tells us. Peter even denied knowing Jesus. Peter was not always this rock-solid expression of faith, even though that's the name that Jesus gave him. Peter means rock. He wavered. He wavered in his faith. My favorite story of Peter is when Jesus walks on the water. Now, I have this lame preacher joke that I tell. How long have I been here? 1 year and 3/4. You've probably already heard it 3 times, but you're going to hear it again. Do you remember when those bulletin blooper jokes were going around? I'm dating myself here. It was when the internet was was young, and so we were sending those around to one another in email because we could. So there was one that I loved, and it was allegedly, and I think a lot of those were just made up, but anyway, they were allegedly from a church, a Baptist church, that had a morning Sunday service and an evening Sunday service. The morning Sunday service sermon title was Jesus Walks on the Water. The evening Sunday service sermon title was Searching for Jesus. I know it's lame. It's lame. But here's my favorite story of Peter and Jesus. It's found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14. And after he had dismissed the crowd, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he, Jesus, came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water and came toward Jesus. But when Peter noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Jesus in the story, of course, represents this Christ nature that is the truth of us, our divine essence, that point of being within the mind of God. I can remember so many times in my life when I was filled with faith and conviction, sure of the presence of God to heal and transform my life, and I started walking in the direction of that goal, of that transformation, and I, like Peter, looked down, and I noticed the winds, and I saw the waves lapping at my heels, and I allowed my eyes to fall away from the goal, and I descended into that swirling tumult again. I found myself right back where I was. I looked down, just like Peter. Overcoming our challenges often requires that we get out of the boat. That's the first step. Get out of the boat, our current way of viewing life's problems, and step out on faith. And it requires us to also, as we step on faith, to discard the waves and the winds and the good opinions of others, perhaps, that keep our minds and hearts steady and focused on the power of God within us. The Sea of Galilee is a freshwater lake in the Holy Land, the northern part of the Holy Land. Its name is derived from a Hebrew word that means circle. It is also a word that means to wallow. Our fears are that which will, if we let them, cause us to use our power of faith, again, to make mountains out of molehills at times, but also to keep us circling in the same experience over and over and over again. A cycle of manifestation that continues to repeat itself over and over and over again. And again, this Hebrew word for Galilee also means to wallow. I grew up on a hog farm. My grandparents raised hogs. And I remember watching the pigs wallow in the mud, covering themselves completely with it. And sometimes we do that. We wallow and we wallow in the difficulties of life, covering ourselves with it so much so that it begins to become our identity. It begins to be who and what we are. And we invest our faith in that identity rather than allowing the Christ to call that power of faith back unto itself and to ground us in the understanding that we are powerful and divine in nature. And so we must get out of the boat to stop the cycle of difficulty, to make a break in the pattern of thinking and behaving that created all of this in the first place, and begin to walk toward a new and transformed life. But we have to keep our mind and our focus on the goal. And the waves may lap at our feet, but we don't want to look down. You know, I find that as a great metaphor or an analog for where we are right now in the midst of COVID-19. That right now we might feel that there are some waves lapping at our feet, but let's not look down. Let's keep looking at the goal of healing and transformation. According to Winifred Hausman, in a book it's quite old, it's been out for many years now, but it's called Your God-Given Potential. She says, faith is the quality in us which enables us to look past appearances of lack, limitation, or difficulty, to take hold of the divine idea and believe in it, even though we do not see any evidence of it except within our minds. Through faith, we know with an inner knowing that truth has not yet, the truth that has not, expressed itself yet in the manifest world. In other words, to quote Hebrews 11:1, now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. To know that there is this divine idea of wholeness, this divine idea that we are, this Christ, this essence, this point of being within the mind and heart of God, that we are in truth. And let's hold on to that faith and that belief and that understanding so that we begin to head toward that expression in our lives. As we develop our faith faculty, our God-given potential, we begin to speak to ourselves positive words of truth. And we begin to speak positive words of truth about our world as well. So let's keep walking, head high, don't look down, and let's enter into the realization of our transformed life. Well, what in this world does this have to do with a community of faith, which is what the lesson title is today? As I shared in a lesson a few months ago, community is not only a thing, it's not only a noun, but it's also a verb. It's also an experience. We are part of a community and in that community, we feel a sense of connection, of oneness, as if we are among siblings. A community is a gathering of people who come together most often around shared values. A sense of community is what results from a gathering of people who share the same or similar values. To feel in community is to feel that one belongs. Again, there's a deep sense of connection, but there is also a faith in one another. We see the highest and best in one another. We see the Christ within one another. And sometimes we believe for another what they cannot or will not believe for themselves at that moment. We have faith in them. We have faith in the Christ within them. We have an absolute commitment that they are a point of being within the mind and heart of God. So a community of faith is a place where we not only ground ourselves in God, but we also have faith in one another as a grounded being as well. That is the core of who and what we are as a spiritual community. That is the heart of who and what we are as a spiritual community. These values that we will share over this month are the organizing principle around which this spiritual community revolves. And it is faith that grounds all of it. God bless you.